Hi everybody and welcome to the EJP RD Workshop Contemporary Outcome Measure for Neuromuscular Diseases. This workshop was held in Nice from the 3rd to the 5th of March in 2022 and reunited the most famous experts in neuromuscular disease field and patient association in order to discuss and to teach all the participants about the existing outcome measure and to have a discussion in order to identify the unmet need in outcome measure for development and future research. So you're gonna hear from all the experts their point of view on outcome measure and biomarker for these diseases. The new drugs are coming and clinical trial readiness is very important at this point in order to make this drug available for all the patients. So we have the idea of this workshop because we think that natural history study and the development and the understanding of outcome measure in neuromuscular disease is the first step for the drug development in these diseases. And it's also very important to have a collective discussion with other colleagues in different fields of neuromuscular diseases and with patients. So the European Joint Program for Rare Disease offers us this opportunity, and I think it's a great opportunity for discussion and to advance our knowledge in this field.
In this field, we all experts in neuromuscular disorders, I would say, try to collaborate to improve the knowledge about rare disease. This is a fundamental step because we need to increase the awareness about the importance of studying the rare disorders. It is also important to try to better know this kind of patient to reach earlier the diagnosis. So an early diagnosis will allow you to treat patient earlier, so before the degeneration of tissues. So this is one of the problems we have to deal with. But about the progression of studies in finding the therapies, another point is that there are a limited number of patients because of rare disease, and to perform trials is difficult because you really need quite a high number of patients to have a relevant trial. So this is not always possible because patients are very heterogeneous. Sometimes you cannot mix a type of patient with others. So this is one of the problems we have to deal with when we study new trials. On the other end, the other problem is an economical problem because there are limited funds because of rare disease, limited funds to use for new trials. Of course, this depends on the institutions and from companies. Institutions are not always aware about the importance of starting new trials. Companies are more interested, but it is necessary when there is a new program to discuss with professionals. Otherwise, the risk is that you perform a trial and the trial is not efficient. The NMD community is very interested in developing new trials because of the number of patients which is increasing. So we try to perform a better diagnosis and to increase the number of patients recognized. But sometimes it's necessary to have the collaboration also of the association of patients and to have a promotion of these efforts done by the researchers to try to better know exactly what are the pathological processes on the basis of the different disorders. Once you have the right diagnosis and the number of patients is really adequate for new trials, it is important also to establish registries of the disease, because with the registry you can compare different data coming from different centers, and you can have an homogeneous number of patients to be submitted to new trials. So this is something that is possible sometimes, but could be possible in a larger number of, with a larger number of trials, once either institutions or professionals, experts in neuromuscular disorders, and patients and their associations will cooperate all together.
Well, in some places it's the diagnosis of the patients. In some areas, next generation sequences is not offered, so that is an obstacle. We need natural history data on practically most of the conditions. There are about 200 different muscle diseases, and maybe we have the natural history sufficiently in just a handful. So that is really missing. Another problem is that patients have a wide range of in their phenotype. So some patients quickly get confined to a wheelchair, and others have a very chronic disease, and that is also something to be considered for a clinical trial. Probably you would have to do two separate trials in those populations. And finally, I think the authorities need to speed up these trials. There are some fast track possibilities for these diseases, but still the path for a clinical trial with all the regulatory steps is very tedious and very slow still, and it could be sped up. Well, I mean, imaging biomarkers I like them. There is no denying when you, on an MRI, see that muscle is replaced by fat. This is reality. This is something real happening. And although you do not see a functional outcome yet, because it's only a small portion of the muscle that you lose, this is what's going to happen in the end. So I think that's a very strong tool. The trouble with muscle MRI is you don't get this result immediately. Usually with chronic diseases, you would have to wait a year or sometimes even longer to see this irreversible step. And you don't want to wait that long if you want to treat somebody. So serum marker can be much more quick hints to you that whatever that your treatment will actually work. The simplest being CK. If you have very high CK levels and the treatment you give is a wonder treatment, you would see a massive drop in CK values. So that's the most simple serum marker that will very early on show you that the treatment works, and you won't have to wait that year to show that it also fans out in imaging. And of course, other serum markers can also be used, but it all depends on the specific disease and the specific treatment.
Well, this is rather a complicated question, but I think the first mistake is to believe that there is ideal outcome measures, and I think it doesn't exist yet. I think also one of the most common mistake is to not take time, enough time with the patients to evaluate them during clinical trials. This is not that the same time as in clinical routine. I mean, there must be dedicated physiotherapists or clinical evaluator for the clinical trials. We need time. Another limit is that we must ask the patient to do performance, and thus we need to encourage them, and we need a real involvement of the patients during the trials. Yeah, this is a good point also. I think we need symptom-specific outcome measures rather than disease-specific outcome measures. And we need outcome measures that can be used whatever the clinical status of the patient. I mean, that can be continuously used across all the stages of the disease. So I rather prefer the generic scales or approaches rather than disease-specific approaches. But this is a very personal point of view.
Well, I think there will be marked changes in the treatment of myasthenia gravis due to the new treatments coming up. The new treatments seem very promising, they seem safe, and they definitely improve the situation in patients with myasthenia gravis. However, there are some big challenges regarding these new drugs. First, and perhaps foremost, they are not really compared with the old ones. We have not done so far comparative studies comparing new drugs with old ones. We know that they work, but not if they are better than the old ones. This is really a challenge, I think, especially because these new drugs are so expensive. To be sure that they should be used, and especially early in the disease, we need also to have cost-benefit comparisons, because myasthenia gravis is not a devastating disease, it's not a progressive disease. Of course, the patients need the optimal treatment, they need safety, and hopefully the new drugs after some years will prove safe also in the long term, and they will become cheaper during the years. So at the moment, these new drugs are used in addition to the old ones, and usually for severe cases, for cases with specific problems, whereas in the future, I believe that they will be used on a broader, in a broader scale, and also early in the disease. Real life is the most important. Of course, controlled studies, they are important for approval of a drug and to show safety and that it really works. But to know drugs' place in real world, it is real world data. I think, for example, studies, if the drug is continued in the patients, if the patients continue to use the drug after 6 months, after 12 months, after 2 years, that will often show if it's really effective and without side effects. Also, in trials, it's a specific cohort of patients that are included. Elderly patients with comorbidities, for example, are rarely included in controlled studies, whereas these patients are often, or they represent big challenges in the need of new and better drugs. Also long-term data, side effects, rare and severe side effects, these are aspects that will turn out in real life after use in hundreds and thousands of patients after the drug has been approved in controlled studies.
Yeah, there is an urgent need for biological markers in myasthenia gravis to better understand the development, the clinical cause, and also potential treatment benefits in patients with myasthenia. Well, we already have diagnostic biomarkers in myasthenia gravis, and these are the antibodies directed against antigens expressed at the neuromuscular junction, right? But these antibodies, they poorly correlate with clinical disease severity, so we need to better understand how these antibodies function, how these antibodies function translate into clinical syndromes. And the more we learn about the mechanisms of these antibodies, the more we will improve biomarkers for predicting the clinical cause, disease severity, and treatment benefits in myasthenia gravis.
Well, the inflammatory neuropathies are a large field because there are many neuropathies that are part of these, and we need indeed good outcome measures for two main reasons. We have to be able to assess patients to see how they are doing, and then if we treat the patient, then we need to find out whether they're responsive to the treatment, and that's also a reason to have appropriate outcome measures. So we do have quite a number of outcome measures for inflammatory neuropathies at this point, and these concern Guillain-Barré syndrome, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyradical neuropathy, which is CIDP, and then there is also multifocal motor neuropathy, MMN, and there are the neuropathies which are due to a paraprotein, and the most important one is those with a neuropathy with antibodies against a protein which is MAG, myelin-associated glycoprotein. And we need good outcome measures for impairment, so what functions cannot be performed because of this impairment. We also need outcome measures to see what the disability is. And then another series of outcome measures is important to take into account quality of life. How is the patient doing in daily life and how does he feel? Yes, so further to what I already said, impairment measures are very important because that gives you an objective idea about function. So that's indeed a patient with weakness or sensory loss. You should be able to quantitate this and also to see over time, with or without treatment, how things go. Are they going better? Are they improving or not? And the problem with many outcome measures is that they are ordinal, which means they are qualitative. So it's good, it's better, it's worse, but you really need to be quantitative. And there is a new type of outcome measures for this, and these are built according to the RAS model, which allows you to make the outcome measure linear, which means that it becomes an interval measure, not really like the ordinal outcome measure where you can say, okay, it's qualitative, but here it's quantitative. You really have a numeric. And then there is also disability, and there again, we have now reasonable outcome measures. One of these is the IRODS, it's the inflammatory neuropathy RAS-built overall disability scale. So this is a linear scale which works very good, but it needs to be improved for several of the inflammatory neuropathies, for example, for multifocal motor neuropathy, also the anti-MAG neuropathy.
Part of the difficulty is learning the evaluation. So I think there's two parts. Where do we go from evaluating? How do we teach people to who are younger and are inexperienced to be able to implement this readily in clinic. As we have a changing natural history, we need to have people be able to readily use these outcome measures to follow longitudinally. And so there needs to be education efforts to ensure there's consistency, standardization, and reliability, particularly in the outcome measures that have been validated for a specific neuromuscular disease. In regards to outcomes development, I think there's a really bright horizon where there's an intercollaboration between engineers, statisticians, bioinformatics, so that we can have more granularity and sensitivity in the outcome measures that we're using. As we're seeing a changing phenotype, there is not only functional changes, but there are smaller changes in quality of movement that we may be able to utilize technology to better understand some of the biometrics or the kinematics of movement that we may not be able to see via the naked eye.
I must say that it's difficult to have an overall view of the patient with hereditary neuropathy with the current outcome measures because the impairment and disability is made up of different features: motor, sensory, skeletal deformities, autonomic involvement for amyloid neuropathy. So this is the challenge, the first challenge. The second is to capture what is really important for the patient. And so currently we need to use different outcome measures, composite outcome measures, to have the overall view of the disability and impairment of the patient, which is not always the best thing for the outcome measures. I think this is a very important feature, and to develop tools to evaluate the problems that the patient face during real life is very important, because the physician does not sometimes have the real idea of what's happening at home for the patients, and this will help us a lot to manage the patient and to also to develop outcome measures that keep into account the real life experience of the patient.
I think that the topic of this question is very important, because we have to underline what is the importance of the innovation in dealing with the neuromuscular disorders. Actually, there are a lot of needs for a patient affected by a neuromuscular disease which need to be afforded with technology. This can start from, for instance, diagnosis, and with these tools try to shorten the delay for make a correct diagnosis in these patients, but also think about, for instance, bioengineering or biocomputerized devices that can help the patient with a neuromuscular disorder. And finally, we have to see to the new horizons from the biotech in finding new drugs to correct these very disabling diseases. So we can expect that innovation can add a new value to these diseases in different fields.
Well, I've loved this workshop because I think it addresses a very important topic in neuromuscular disorders. The most important things we've been through is, for example, the difference, the separation between the outcome measure we use in clinical practice and the outcome measure more useful in research practice. I love this distinction because I think for students, for residents, and for clinicians in general, it's important to know both of these things and know the differences.
So about this workshop, I really love the main topic because it's a hot topic. I mean, we live in an era, pharmacological era, in which new therapies are available and new therapies are coming. So we really need to have good outcome measures. And this is a workshop made to discuss about this topic. And so when we will have a new good outcome measure, we will be able also to verify if these drugs are useful for this neuromuscular disorders. The quality of teaching was really high. Because there were all the most important doctors from Europe that could talk about their specific neuromuscular disorders. So I loved it.
Yeah, of course, the teachers were the main experts of this field in Europe, and all the conversation and the discussion, the part of the discussion was really large, and I appreciated this thing.
I think the next workshop will be on digital biomarker, because I've seen that all the presentation end with this digital and the perspective for the future. So I think we need to discuss. Another possibility could be the patient-reported outcome measure, because I think that we need to listen more to the voice of the patient, to better understand their disease and their need, and to better understand the clinical significance of statistical changes in outcome measure. And another idea could be methodology, because I think we need to understand more methodology to develop outcome measure and methodology in clinical trial to give better advice and to boost the drug development.